This week on Empowering Midlife Wellness, I'm talking about the miraculous gut microbiome, how to optimize it, and particularly about this incredible bacteria called Akkermansia, why you might want to consider taking it, or at least enhancing it in your own body through nutrition and lifestyle changes. Hi, friends, and welcome to this week's episode. If you're just joining me, I'm Dr. Susan. I'm a board-certified gynecologist and certified menopause practitioner, dedicated 100% to taking care of women in midlife, women just like me who want to feel great now through perimenopause, menopause, and beyond, and also do everything we can to build the healthiest elderly version of ourselves because, of course, that starts right now. So today, and actually next week as well, because this is such a big topic, I'm going to be digging into what I've learned recently about the fantastic gut microbiome and some really interesting studies that are really even enhancing our understanding even more about how important it is to have healthy gut bacteria. So most of you have probably heard that we have literally trillions of bacteria living in and on our body. And bacteria are not all bad. Certainly we need these bacteria to be healthy. And the bacteria in our gut have an incredible array of amazing, wonderful jobs that need to be done to keep us healthy. So long ago, we're back when I was in medical school, we were starting to understand that gut dysbiosis, that means an alteration or lack of optimization of the bacteria in our gut, can be associated with certain diseases. Even that long ago, we understood that when the bacteria became less healthy, the gut lining started to break down or leak. Yucky stuff from inside our colon would kind of get out of the colon into our system. That would cause the immune system to be fired up to get rid of all this stuff. And that would cause inflammation, autoimmune disease, all kinds of allergies, all kinds of sensitivities. But now even more amazing literature has shown that gut dysbiosis does that for sure. And more importantly, things that affect almost everybody, very much associated with common things like insulin resistance, weight gain, diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease. Arguably, gut health could be one of the dominoes at the very beginning of most chronic diseases. So optimizing our gut health has moved out of the kind of interesting, kind of witchy stuff to talk about, and now really into straight up science that this is super important. So how has this become such a big problem? Absolutely, gut dysbiosis is very much related to this sudden uptick in really the last 20 years in all of the diseases that I just mentioned: obesity, insulin resistance, diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's. One has to wonder where this is coming from, and no doubt a lot of it has to do with changes in our diet. So back when we used to be healthy, living on a farm, at least nutritionally healthy, we were eating a lot of fiber. We were not eating a lot of sugar. We weren't eating a lot of preservatives, additives, processed foods, alcohol, chemicals, etc. And the bacteria in our gut had a chance to have a healthy life and do their job. So what do these guys do? Well, healthy bacteria, first of all, need something to eat because they are living organisms, and they eat fiber. Now, fiber, as you know, is indigestible for humans, but bacteria require it to eat. So if we're eating lots of fiber, we're much more likely to have a healthy gut biome. On the other hand, if we're eating nothing but takeout food and getting no fiber, these poor guys have nothing to eat and they're not going to thrive. So a low fiber diet is probably the number one thing that's associated with this increase in gut dysbiosis that we're seeing, and the associated diseases that go along with that, as well as all the other stuff, sugar, alcohol, etc., the things that we know have changed dramatically in the last few years. So how do we restore a healthy gut biome? Number one, we change what we're feeding these guys. So they want to eat fiber. They do not want to eat sugar, processed food, alcohol, non-nutritive sweeteners, so many of the things that many of us are consuming, and it's making it impossible for this incredible population to maintain their health. Well, who cares? And what happens when gut dysbiosis is an issue? Well, let's talk about how these bacteria work, very high level. So they're in our colon, we hope. Fiber comes in, we hope. Then they have something to eat. And then as a result, they produce these very important short-chain fatty acids. One of the most commonly talked about ones is something called butyrate. There are some others like propionate, acetate. In any case, these particular byproducts that the bacteria make during their lifespan help keep the walls of our intestines healthy. There's a mucin layer. It's a very fragile layer that has to be intact. It's actually made of these things called tight junctions because you want it to be super tight. You don't want this stuff leaking out into your system. And when the mucin layer is healthy, because it's metabolizing these wonderful short-chain fatty acids, then everything's good. Well, if we don't have those byproducts of the healthy bacteria, the mucin layer breaks down. We start getting some lack of integrity of those junctions, and things start going wonky. Now we've got stuff leaking into our system, inflammation's going up, our immune system's being kicked in, insulin resistance is going up, all the things we don't want, right? So what else causes that to happen? We've already talked about not eating fiber, eating all the things that we know are not good for us. Primary one is taking antibiotics. So antibiotics are not bad. We need to take them sometimes, absolutely. They've been absolutely revolutionary for helping health in the Western world in the past 100 years. However, they're vastly overprescribed. Many people take them when they have a virus or something that would never be helped by an antibiotic in the first place. They take them for too long. Again, I prescribe antibiotics. I do take them sometimes, but antibiotics are not that specific. They don't just target the one organism that we're trying to get rid of. They end up killing a whole lot of other stuff as well. So when we take an antibiotic by mouth, it might take care of our bronchitis, but it'll also kill a lot of the bacteria in our gut. And then things can go wonky unless we can correct that pretty quickly. Well, one of the beautiful things is we can correct that pretty quickly because of the fact that bacteria generate so fast and they can change very quickly. We can literally go to another country for a week and come back with a totally different gut microbiome. It can change quickly. So the good news is we can wipe it out quickly, but we can also restore it quickly. So once you've corrected your long-term nutritional plan by eating fiber, reducing sugar, getting rid of processed foods, limiting alcohol, etc., then if we do take antibiotics, for the week afterwards, sometimes we call it a restorative week, we want to really hit fiber hard and even consider taking some live healthy bacteria to replace those that we've killed. So let's talk about this terminology, prebiotic, probiotic. That might be something you might take if you take antibiotics, and even postbiotic. Well, just to clarify that language, prebiotic applies to fiber. That's the food that we give the bacteria to live off. There are some other things other than fiber, like polyphenols and inulin, not insulin, but inulin. Those are naturally occurring substances that are found in certain plants. These are things that bacteria like to eat. So we want to get lots of those in our system, and those are prebiotics. So we can get prebiotics in our diet, or we can buy a supplement, fiber supplement, for example, that would be called a prebiotic. So if you're taking something that's called a prebiotic, it's basically food for these guys. Second, what's a probiotic? Well, that is a dose of live bacteria. We hope it's live, because I will tell you, in the supplement industry, a huge number, I don't know the percentage, but it's probably upwards of 50% of probiotics don't have live bacteria in them, or at least once they hit your stomach, they don't make it into your colon, which is where they need to get to. So if you're taking a probiotic, it's really important to take one that is from a very reputable source. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And one that's been tested and shown to be able to survive getting through the stomach and actually repopulate the healthy bacteria in your colon, because that's really where we want them, everywhere from below your stomach on down. So if they just get killed by your stomach acid, or if they're already dead when you buy them from the store, that's not going to advance the ball. So a probiotic could also be found in food. Yogurt. Now, yogurt has certain bacteria in it, particularly ones called lactobacillus. Now, that's great, but it's not the whole spectrum that we might need. Also, fermented foods, things like sauerkraut, kombucha, kimchi, stuff I don't eat much. So you can certainly get live bacteria in your food, that's for sure, or in a supplement that we'll talk about in a moment. So that's what a probiotic is. And then a postbiotic applies to what these bacteria produce. So that would be butyrate in particular, or some of those other short-chain fatty acids. So ideally, we would get the postbiotic on our own, from our own body's production, from our own healthy bacteria, rather than buying a supplement of butyrate. I mean, that is one way to get it. But going to the idea that we want to take care of the root cause of disease, the primary goal is to get our own body to produce it by itself, not to be taking 500 supplements, but to encourage our body to make it on her own. Okay, so prebiotic is fiber, probiotic is live bacteria, postbiotic is what they produce. Okay, so that is talking about some of those words. Well, let's talk about what kind of bacteria are we talking about here. I mentioned one called lactobacillus. That's a very common one that you might see in a supplement if you're taking a probiotic, and certainly that's a very healthy member of the population in our gut. Another one called bifidobacteria. That's another common one that's in a lot of supplements. And a little side note is one of the reasons why lactobacillus and bifidobacterium are the most common in supplements is they're very cheap and easy to produce. So one of the maybe obvious things is that inside our colon, there's no oxygen. So the bacteria that thrive there often are what are called anaerobic bacteria. That means they don't need oxygen to survive. And in fact, some of them can't even tolerate oxygen. They're actually killed by oxygen. Now, the lactobacillus and the bifidobacterium can do with or without oxygen. So they can be grown quite easily in the lab without having to do a bunch of fancy things to get rid of all the oxygen, because that's actually very difficult. I'll tell you about that whole process in a moment. So if you're taking a multi-strain probiotic, chances are it probably has a lot of those in them, because it's easy to produce. So how do they do this? In the factory, basically a giant vat. Think about like if you're making beer or wine in a big vat, they throw all this stuff in there, they stir it all up, grow the bacteria from a culture, and then they produce this paste that's then freeze-dried. So once it's freeze-dried, it's made into a powder that can be put into a capsule. And that's great because these particular ones, they can do with oxygen. It doesn't bother them. Once they're freeze-dried, most of them do not need to be refrigerated. That's a real pain if you're making a product that has to be refrigerated, but most freeze-dried probiotics do not need to be refrigerated. For example, there's one that I've taken for a long time made by Thorne. It's a great multi-strain probiotic that survives at room temperature. Now, once you take it, it's the hydration from your body that brings these guys back to life. How many come back to life? Who knows? That's a good question. This is just a fact that supplement companies don't really like to do these kind of studies, and there's not a lot of stuff published about studies regarding how many of these things are living when they actually get into your body. For example, typically if you look at the box of a probiotic, it will count in what are called colony-forming units, or CFUs, and it might say we've got 1 billion or 5 billion CFUs. Well, that's interesting, but all that means is how many grew in the lab. That doesn't necessarily translate into how many still survived the freeze-drying process. Some estimate 50 to 90% of the bacteria are killed during the freeze-drying process. And then furthermore, how many are still living once you put it in your mouth? And even furthermore after that, how many are living when they get all the way down to your colon? So suffice to say, the great majority of products, probably very little or even none. Now, Thorne is a great company. I do like their products, and their multi-strain probiotic is one that I personally do take because it's had some pretty rigorous testing. But you can see all the ways that this could go wonky and why what's written on the box, it's interesting, but not necessarily what your body's going to see. So we talked about some of the common bacteria like lactobacillus, bifidobacteria in particular. And now let's get into this even more interesting bacteria that is starting to get a lot of attention, and that is Akkermansia. Now, Akkermansia is the name of a group of bacteria. The one that is particularly being studied in reference to all of its benefits for the gut, is Akkermansia muciniphila, just if you want to be fancy. But when we say Akkermansia, that is what we are referring to. And most products, with the exception of one, that state they have live Akkermansia in them, probably don't. Now, there's a fantastic company I have no affiliation with them called Pendulum. It's very difficult to produce because this particular bacteria does not like oxygen. It is killed in the presence of oxygen. So it's quite difficult to grow it in a lab. You actually have to have a very, very expensive facility that will manufacture it in such a way that no oxygen touches it. Once it's freeze-dried, it's put in capsules, and at that point, it can sit on the counter and not be bothered until you take it into your mouth. But producing it is quite difficult. It makes it quite expensive, which is why many companies avoid it. But here's some really interesting things about Akkermansia and really what I wanted to talk to you about today. So back in about 2000 or so, studies started being done recognizing that this particular bacteria called Akkermansia had some very special properties in ways that it worked inside our colon. There were some scientists that noticed that there was a direct relationship between the amount of Akkermansia we had and obesity. And that's an inverse relationship. So obese people, in general, looking at the population, have lower levels of Akkermansia than normal weight people. And even more interesting, in twin studies, so if you're looking at if something's going to really make a difference, looking at identical twins and seeing if one has something different than the other can really rule out this nature, that means genetic, or nurture, that means environmental factor. So looking at sets of identical twins where one was obese or diabetic and the other one wasn't, there's a direct correlation with the amount of Akkermansia that those two people had. So genetically, they're identical. So we've ruled out the nature part. But the environmental part, what they have done with their lifestyle, was different. So very interesting, in a healthy, non-diabetic patient with normal blood sugar, Akkermansia is about 5 to 10% of the total bacteria in our system. So most of us have tons of it. It's one of the more common bacteria in a healthy patient. In patients with diabetes, and particularly in these twin studies, very frequently the obese diabetic twin had 0. So quite interesting that the amount of Akkermansia that we carry seems to be directly related to our ability to metabolize sugar and also to our ability to maintain ideal weight. Well, isn't that fascinating? Well, and why is that? Well, it seems that Akkermansia has a direct effect in our production of this incredible hormone that most of us know about now called GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide, number 1. So GLP-1, most of us associate that with Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound. GLP-1 agonists, or GLP-1 lookalikes, which are what these weight loss drugs are giving our body a huge bomb of GLP-1 through an injection. Nothing wrong with it. Very good for helping with weight loss. But the thought is that people who have a problem with craving, sugar control, insulin resistance, all the things that might lead you to take a GLP-1 agonist, is caused by a low level of your own GLP-1 production. So wouldn't it be great if we could increase our own GLP-1 production? And actually we can. And Akkermansia is one of the players in that pathway. So when we have a high level of this amazing bacteria naturally occurring in our body, we have higher GLP-1. It actually activates these particular cells called L cells in the colon that produce GLP-1. And so, of course, it's not going to be as much as getting a shot of semaglutide, but having normal GLP-1 production is associated with having normal sugar balance, low risk of diabetes, normal weight, lack of cravings, etc. So it's quite fascinating. And the science is ongoing, looking at how optimizing the amount of Akkermansia we have in our system can cause us to lose weight. I'm not talking crazy stuff here. This has been shown in a randomized controlled trial. Now, there's only one randomized controlled trial that's been done so far looking at this exact question, giving people a multi-strain probiotic, including Akkermansia, and giving people a placebo. And the study looking at 70-some patients who were randomized to 3 different groups, five strain Akkermansia containing probiotic, a 3-strain one, and a placebo. The 5-strain multi-strain probiotic, including the higher level of Akkermansia, had a significant reduction in their blood sugar and hemoglobin A1C, which is that measurement that tells us how our blood sugar control's been over 90 days. So this particular study was run for 90 days and showed remarkable results. Now, that was funded by the company Pendulum, no affiliation, but that is the only company that is actually manufacturing Akkermansia in an oxygen-free environment and producing a product that we can now buy and take ourselves as patients. And I can tell you, I take it myself and now have started recommending it for our patients. Now, does taking Akkermansia take the place of eating a healthy diet or even of semaglutide if you're very overweight? No, of course it doesn't. But restoring it to normal is a really good thing to do in the pathway of helping our metabolism to stay healthy, even if we are metabolically healthy already. Like me, for example, I take it to prevent getting a problem and to help keep my gut microbiome healthy, even though it already was pretty healthy. Now, for sure, if we take a course of antibiotics, I would think very carefully about maybe this is a great idea to not only eat lots of fiber, but to take a multi-strain probiotic, including Akkermansia, since that particular bacteria seems to be the highest level bacteria in keeping our health optimal. Curiously, I mentioned that study did not look at Akkermansia by itself because none of these bacteria by themselves are going to keep the gut microbiome optimally healthy. We need to have a balanced population, including Akkermansia. However, you can take Akkermansia on its own, the assumption being you've already got a healthy gut microbiome, and we're just trying to elevate that level a little bit. Well, how would you know? Well, you can guess by talking about your own gut symptoms. For example, if you have gassiness, bloating, intermittent constipation, diarrhea, burping, any GI symptoms that would in the past have been called irritable bowel syndrome. Now we think that's probably synonymous with gut dysbiosis. Or if you have autoimmune disease, if you've got joint pain, if you've got rashes, if you get hives, if you have allergies, all of these things that suggest that your immune system is overactive. If your blood markers for inflammatory markers, things like HSCRP, highly sensitive CRP, are elevated, anything that's suggesting that you have inflammation might be a really good idea to think about. Now you can test, there's a very simple home test that you can get, I'll show you here, that will tell you a pretty good idea of what your bacterial content is, whether your Akkermansia is high or low. And if it comes back low or 0, I would absolutely think about replacing it. So it is really fascinating that we're moving out of this kind of witchy world where people talked about the gut biome as if it was like, not real science. It's absolutely real science, and we now have randomized controlled trials showing that it helps with sugar control. Now, if we lower our sugar and our hemoglobin A1C goes down, then we lose weight, we reduce our risk of diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's. So the effects of this simple intervention are massive. And can you do it without taking anything? Absolutely. Eat lots of fiber, avoid all the things I just talked about. So don't eat a lot of sugar, don't eat processed foods, limit alcohol, eat lots of healthy vegetables. Yeah, we could do that and we should. But again, taking a probiotic is something that I've chosen to do because my diet's not perfect every day. It's not, and many of you might feel the same way. So this is a really amazing new frontier for understanding how many health problems are related to the health of our gut microbiome. Many of you might have heard years ago, studies started being done on rats and mice. So we know a lot about rats and mice when it comes to altering the gut microbiome. For example, you can get some feces from an obese mouse and put them into a skinny mouse, and the skinny mouse will get fat and vice versa. Now, it's a little harder to do those studies on humans for obvious reasons. Now, we certainly could get a capsule with human feces in it, and those are being developed to be used as drugs. It sounds gross, but hey, it's just basically a probiotic, but it comes from a healthy human gut biome. So the idea of using fecal transplants to replace the healthy bacteria that we might have lost if we were hospitalized or got chemotherapy or got a bunch of antibiotics. It's a pretty interesting idea. Some people even joke about collecting your own feces and freezing it if you're going to take antibiotics or if you're going to go to the hospital. And hey, that might be something that we recommend in the future. So these things are on the horizon. There are drugs that are being developed that are stimulating a fecal transplant. So we know in mice certain things happen. Obviously, that can't always be extrapolated to humans, but there is a lot of data suggesting that if we replace your gut biome, if it's unhealthy, with a healthy gut biome, whether that's with food, probiotic, or even a fecal transplant when that becomes available, we will be doing this soon, I guarantee it. In 10 years, we'll all be taking this stuff. Yeah, we get thinner, our blood sugar improves, our risk of diabetes goes down, therefore we live longer, have less heart disease, Alzheimer's, all of those things. So it is a really amazing new frontier. I did want to shout out to Pendulum. This is an amazing company. Again, not affiliated with them, but if you check out, you'll see that they are really on the cutting edge of breaking open the understanding of how all of this works to improve our health. So absolutely, first, we start with nutrition. So lots of fiber, cutting out all those things I talked about, might make you think twice about drinking too much alcohol, too much Diet Coke, lots of processed food. Take care of these guys like they're your family. We've got to feed them healthy food so they can thrive. And when we cannot, when we've had a bad week or when we've taken antibiotics, we need to go into 911 mode to work on replacing them. Otherwise, not only are we going to have a tummy ache, we're actually going to get sick, and it's going to increase our risk of the most common diseases that kill us. So really fascinating stuff. I just think it's so exciting and interesting. Personally, I'm taking Akkermansia myself. Do recommend it for my patients, so check it out if you get it. Not because I'm affiliated, but because they're the only company that knows how to produce it accurately without oxygen. I would get it from Pendulum. So Pendulum is the only company that has studies proving that their stuff actually is still alive when it gets into your tummy. So that's worth noting. So I hope you enjoyed this today. If you learned something, please subscribe, share it with your friends, and I'll be back next week talking some more about the gut microbiome and how it affects nitric oxide, another amazing thing. I'm so excited to be learning something new every day, and I hope you are too. I'll see you next week.